I stood the post beside Corporal Halvard Price for 3 winters, and in all the time I only once saw him leave his mark without an order standing behind it. It happened a little after midnight, in a cold that bit straight through the wool, at the western wicket gate of Aldenmere, the smaller, half-forgotten gate the tour groups never photograph, the one new men drew as much for punishment as for duty. I had the near post that night. He had the far one. Neither of us expected company. The western wicket is a quiet posting on the best of nights and a miserable one on the worst, and that particular night was sliding toward the worst, a thin snow coming down sideways, the kind that finds the gap between collar and neck no matter how the collar is buttoned. Price never complained about it, not once in 3 winters, which was the first thing I learned about him and very nearly the last. He stood his hours the same whether the crowds were 10 deep or, as that night, nobody at all, back straight, eyes forward, the kind of stillness that makes you forget, after enough hours of it, that there's a man inside the tunic at all. I used to tell the newer recruits that Price could outweight a glacier. I meant it as a compliment. That night I learned there were things even he would not simply wait out. We had perhaps 4 hours left on the watch by then, the kind of stretch where a man's mind starts doing arithmetic just to stay awake, minutes until relief, paces along the wall, the small private games every guardsman invents to survive the cold without ever once breaking the posture that says he isn't surviving anything at all. I was 3/4 of the way through inventing a new one when I heard the wheel of the chair on the cobblestones, long before I saw it, and felt the particular drop in the stomach that comes from knowing, before you've confirmed it, that the next several minutes are not going to go the way the manual describes them. She came first, pushing the wheelchair through the thin snow, her breath fogging white under the gate lamp before her face came into the light. Behind her, wrapped to the chin in blankets that did nothing at all against that particular cold, sat an old man so thin the chair seemed to be wearing him rather than the reverse. "I know it's not visiting hours," she said, before either of us could find the words to send her away. "I know. I'm sorry to come at this hour. He doesn't have many nights left, and he asked for this one specifically." I couldn't tell him no. Protocol on a closed gate after dark is simple, and we are trained to recite it without thinking. No admittance, no exception, refer all requests to the duty sergeant in the morning. I had the first half of that sentence out of my mouth before I noticed Price had not said it with me. He had stepped half a pace toward the bars instead, and gone very still in a different way than his usual stillness, the way a man goes still when he's just recognized something he wasn't looking for. The old man's coat had fallen open at the throat in the wind, and pinned there, half buried under a wool scarf, was a small brass regimental badge, not the pattern issued now, but the older one, retired from service decades before either Price or I had been born. I had walked past 100 veterans wearing 100 pins and never once seen Price react to any of them. He knew this one on sight, the way you know a word in your own language faster than you can explain how you learned it. "Where did you serve, sir?" he asked, quiet enough that I had to lean in to catch it over the wind. "Here," the old man said. His voice came out thinner than the snow falling between us. "This gate. 18 months, before they sent my company to Drenek." He stopped, gathered something back from wherever the cold or the years had taken it, and went on. "4 of us stood this wicket together that whole posting. I'm the last of the 4 left breathing, and I expect I won't hold that distinction much longer either. I was 20 years old. Stood this exact post, this exact bar of iron, more nights than I could count, and never came back to it after. Wrong knee, after Drenek. They moved men like me to depot duty and never asked if we minded, and I never told them I did." He lifted one hand toward the bars, and it shook badly enough that his granddaughter reached out to steady it without being asked, the small unconscious motion of someone who had done this 100 times in recent weeks and would do it 100 more before the end. I wanted to see it. Once more. Before I go. I told her it was foolish. She brought me anyway. I expected Price to do exactly what protocol demanded of him, to say he understood, that he was sorry, that the gate would be standing in the morning if the duty sergeant cleared the visit through the proper channel. It is what I would have said. It is, I am fairly certain, what I did say, somewhere underneath the wind, before he cut across it. I would learn only much later, from Price himself, on a different night entirely, that his own grandfather had worn the same retired pattern badge, had told him as a boy exactly what it looked like and exactly which gates the old wartime postings had run, the way some families passed down a trade and others passed down a war. Price had never once mentioned it in 3 winters of standing beside me. He did not mention it that night either. He simply already knew. "Your name, sir," Price said instead. "Holloway. Bertram Holloway." He said nothing for a moment. The snow kept coming. Then he stepped back from the bars, squared himself to the gate the way he would for a king's procession passing in full daylight before 1,000 watching faces, and said, in a voice pitched to carry exactly as far as the wheelchair and no farther, "Private Holloway. Permission to approach the post." It was not a phrase either of us had been taught. It does not appear in any manual I have read in 11 years of trying to find it since. But the old man's eyes came up sharp at the sound of his own forgotten rank, and for one breath I saw, underneath the blankets and the thinness and the 81 years, the 20-year-old who had once heard exactly those words called across this same stretch of cobblestone on some cold morning none of the rest of us would ever know about. The granddaughter looked at me, asking permission with her eyes because there was no one else left at that gate with any authority to ask. I had none to give her, less authority over that bar of iron, in that moment, than the gate lamp standing beside it. But I found I was not moving to stop her either, and after a breath she pushed the chair the last few feet to the bars herself. Holloway tried to salute. I want to set down honestly what I watched, because it is the part one have turned over the most in the years since. He raised his hand the way a man does who has performed the motion 10,000 times and will not forget the shape of it even when his body has forgotten nearly everything else, wrist locked, elbow level, the old precision still buried somewhere under the tremor. It got as far as his collarbone. Then the strength simply left the arm, all at once, the way a held breath finally goes, and the hand began to fall, the gesture dying unfinished in the cold air between an old soldier and the gate he had crossed a city, and apparently the last of his strength, to see one more time. Price moved before I had finished understanding what I was watching. He left his post, left it, with no relief called and no order given, the single thing above every other thing we are trained never, under any circumstance, to do, crossed the few feet of snow-dusted stone, and caught the falling hand in both of his own, gently, the way you would catch something you already knew could not survive a second drop. He did not lift it the rest of the way. He held it exactly where it had stopped, at the collarbone, steady now in his white gloves, and then, with his free hand, came to his own full attention and returned the salute, correct, parade ground precise, given not to the gate behind him, not to the crown above either of their heads, but directly and only to Bertram Holloway, 81 years old and dying, restored for one suspended second to the rank he had never once, in 60 years of depot work and quiet rooms and a knee that never healed right, actually stopped holding inside himself. The granddaughter made a sound I have never found the right word for. Not grief exactly. Not relief exactly either. Something that needed both words and refused to settle for just one. It was Sergeant Aldous Penrose who found us like that on his rounds, a torch beam swinging early around the gatehouse corner and catching the three of us frozen at the bars, one guardsman standing well off his assigned post, one civilian present well outside any visiting hour, and an old man's failing hand still held fast in a corporal's white-gloved fist. I braced myself for what was coming, the report that would have to be written, the words, dereliction, and, unauthorized, that I was already composing in my head on Price's behalf, the conversation with the household comptroller that would surely follow, the black mark that would sit on an otherwise spotless record for the rest of a career. Price did not move to explain himself. He did not let go of the hand. Whatever was about to happen to him, he had apparently already decided it was a fair price. Penrose looked at the scene for what felt like a very long time in that cold, long enough that the granddaughter's breathing changed beside me, long enough that even the snow seemed to be waiting on him. Then his torch beam dropped, almost by accident, to the small brass badge still pinned at Holloway's open collar, and something crossed the sergeant's face that I had genuinely never once seen cross it on duty before, in 3 winters of watching him run this gate with a precision that made even Price look almost casual by comparison. I learned only afterward, from one of the older men in the company, that Penrose's own father had died at Drenick and was never found well enough to bring home, and that Penrose had grown up knowing the name of that campaign the way other boys knew the names of football clubs. He said only, "Carry on," and turned the torch back toward the dark beyond the gatehouse, and finished the rest of his rounds as though he had seen, on that particular circuit, nothing at all worth reporting. Holloway died 11 days later, in his own bed, with his granddaughter beside him, the way she told it afterward in a short letter she sent to the regiment, not a complaint, 3 lines of simple thanks, addressed to no one in particular. Penrose read it once, standing at the duty desk, and then folded it into his own coat pocket rather than into the log where it should, by every rule either of us had ever been taught, have gone. There is no record anywhere in Aldenmuir's official books that Corporal Halvard Price left his assigned post on a winter night 11 years ago. As far as the household's own ledgers are concerned, nothing at the western wicket gate ever happened at all. But every guardsman who has stood that gate since has heard the story, passed the way the things that matter most in this regiment are always passed, mouth to mouth, never written, because writing it down was never the point of it. And every winter, on the night nearest the date, someone leaves a single white rose on the third paving stone in from the bars, exactly where a wheelchair once stood in the snow. No one has ever claimed it. No one, in 11 years, has ever asked too closely who. I have stood that post myself on that particular night more than once since, hoping, I will admit, to finally catch sight of whoever it is. I never have. I have mostly stopped trying. New men still come through the western wicket every winter, drawing it the same way I once did, as a punishment posting nobody wants, and sooner or later one of them asks me why there's a rose on the third stone in from the bars when nothing in the regiment's calendar marks the date for anything at all. I tell them what I am telling you. Most of them go quiet for a while afterward, the way I did. A few have asked me whether they ought to do something, if it ever happened to them, whether they'd be wrong to leave a post for a dying man's salute. I never give them an answer to that. I only tell them what Penrose did with his torch, and let them decide for themselves what kind of guardsman they mean to be long before the night ever arrives that tests it. I have come to believe, the longer I wear this uniform, that some salutes are not given to be witnessed at all. They are given only to be answered, once, by the one man standing close enough to know what was being asked of him, and never again after that, by anyone who needs to see it to believe it happened.